Are you ready to get a masterclass on the 6 secrets to lasting change that nobody talks about? If you are, let's get into it. Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. All right, so we are back with one of my favorite things to do. I'm honestly so grateful that I get to do this and I get to share it with you, and that is my coaching over coffee sessions, where I coach one of my listeners on a specific topic or issue that they're struggling with, that they feel stuck in. And what's really cool is that a lot of these women will come on these sessions and they'll bring up an issue that they've been struggling with for years or decades or their entire life. And they feel like they've tried everything and they just try to do more and work harder, and they feel so frustrated and overwhelmed and hopeless. And this could be anything from emotional eating to binge eating to feeling guilt and shame around food, or having a hard time staying consistent with exercise and healthy eating. And so they come into these sessions and they're carrying a lot of that baggage, a lot of that past with them. And what's awesome to see in these sessions is that within like 30 minutes, 45 minutes, their entire world opens up and they start having breakthroughs and seeing why they've missed so many things, why they keep being stuck, why things haven't been working. And I hope that you've been able to experience the same thing just by listening to them. What I'm always telling my clients inside Food Freedom Academy when I'm coaching someone and I'm helping them work through a specific challenge that they're dealing with, I always tell my clients who are not the ones getting coached, like, you might actually get more value from this. So make sure that you listen and you always ask yourself, what's in it for me? How does this apply to me? So I hope that you're doing the same thing as well when listening to these coaching sessions. And I know that today's episode, you're going to want to pay attention. It's a little bit longer, but trust me, it's worth it. And you're going to want to stick around until the very end, because we're talking about these 6 secrets to lasting change that nobody talks about. And what's really interesting is this coaching session started with a question about emotional eating. What you're going to hear is Kathy is telling me about her challenges with PCOS and turning to food for comfort or even using it as a reward. And it always starts with like a pretty surface level question, and then we go deep. And from what she was telling me about, she had been trying all of the things and she knows what to do and what not to do. And she educates herself, but she has a really hard time applying it and actually creating lasting change in her life. I knew that there was something missing. I knew that there was something that she wasn't seeing, that she wasn't focusing on, that she wasn't addressing. And chances are that if you're someone who feels really frustrated because you keep trying to change your behaviors, do something different, you know what to do, what not to do, and yet you always fall back into your old patterns. You're always back to square one. And then you're so frustrated because you really want to change, but it's just not happening or it's not sticking. Then you're probably missing a lot of these things as well. So let's get into it. Let's talk about the 6 levels of change. And I'm not going to give too much away. So I'm going to play that coaching session with Kathy. Enjoy. What it is that you struggle with the most.
Mhm. So I think some of it has to do with um, definitely stress and emotional eating. Definitely, I see that link there. I've been through a lot of different programs, and I think I'm just tired of being told everything I can't do in that long list of things, whether it's because of my health, different health. I have PCOS and was treated for that. And I'm on a lot of medications. But I think more than anything, it's, I educate myself, but I don't seem to be able to apply everything on a regular basis. I know that I need some more of a support system, um, and not turn to food when it comes to handling different types of stress. The joke of my family is we eat when we're happy, sad, mad, all of that. Um, and that's been ingrained from the beginning. So
Mm,
I'm trying to make a healthier relationship with food. And like I said, I know up here what's going on and what to do and what not to do.
mm,
But when it comes down to it, I don't always make the greatest choices. And
mhm.
so then there's embarrassment and shame around that. So
Yeah.
those are probably the main things I've said.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I want you to know that this frustration that you feel about the educating yourself, having the knowledge, and then having a hard time applying it is
Yeah.
really common, right? If all
Mhm.
we needed was more knowledge about food and about nutrition, then no one would struggle, right? There's so much
Yeah.
information out there. And it's usually a question of either following the wrong advice or having the right advice, but not knowing how to integrate it. So I want to first start seeing what are we working with. So you mentioned big thing is emotional eating, turning to
Mhm.
food. And you
Mhm.
mentioned, I know what to do and what not to do. And you've been educating yourself. So, can you tell me, from your perspective, what are the things that you have as your what to do, what not to do, and what you feel like you should be doing?
So so basically I feel like I could follow certain rules, so to speak. With PCOS, they don't want you to have any wheat or sugar. So, those are kind of the two biggies, but that can only be so sustainable until you can get that really ingrained in your
Mhm.
daily life and in your social life and when you're traveling and all of that. So, I know there's a difference if I have too much gluten. If I just have some, I seem to be okay. But I'm still keeping the weight on, so that tells me my system doesn't do well with that. So there's things along those lines. I drink a lot of water. So I follow all of those rules well. I work out, but I, for a couple of years, needed a knee replacement, and that just happened in March. So now I've been recovering from a total knee replacement. So my mobility was greatly challenged over a couple of years. And then part of the reason, um, they kept saying, "Oh, well, you need to lose more weight." So I would lose a certain amount of weight, and then they'd say, "Oh, well, now we need you to do this." So they kept delaying me. So I finally found a doctor that was willing to work with me because it was so debilitating. So now I have, like I said, I've had the knee replaced, and I've been working with that. So I'm back going to the gym. I do chair aerobics and chair yoga because that's what I can do with my mobility. So I'm not willing to give up my exercise. I know that, so I modify, and I'm not willing to give up healthy foods, but I get a long list of foods that I shouldn't eat. So it's always, I don't know, I get bored, I get stuck, that kind of thing. And and again, I find that when I have kind of an accountability partner, I do much better when I prep things, but for the long time now, I haven't been able to be really in the kitchen. So
Mhm.
now I'm starting to be able to do that and get back to, I can sit at the table and do some prep. I can, but I can't do a lot of long standing. So,
Yeah.
so just working around all of those different things, but I'm not interested in giving up either.
Okay. So I took a lot of information, a lot of good information. And if we go back to what I was saying before, I'll normally be seeing people in two camps. Either someone who is working on the wrong things or
Mhm.
someone who is working on the right things but not knowing how to implement this. You're actually in the first camp.
Okay.
So the reason why you're feeling stuck is because you're working on the wrong things.
Okay.
So what I want you to first know and understand is this might be the first time that you learn this concept, and it's called the logical levels of change. Have you ever heard this concept before?
No, I've heard more of the listening to your system.
Okay. So the logical levels of change is the different tiers at which you will create change in your life. And this is going to be applicable to any aspect of your life. So if you want to change your relationship with work, if you want to change your behaviors around food, around exercise, around money, around friendships or romantic relationships. So it applies, it's for any behavior change. And so I want you to imagine a pyramid. Okay, so a pyramid, and it starts at the very bottom. And so it starts at the bottom, and when you work your way up, the change becomes more significant, more deep, and more lasting. So at the bottom, you've got the most surface level change. And then at the very top, the highest tier is where you have the most deep, conscious, lasting change. So the very bottom, the first layer is people who will change their environment. This is going to be the most surface level change. So this is where you see people who stop bringing certain foods in the house, who
Mhm.
will join a gym, who will have an accountability group. So when we change our environment, it makes us feel like we're moving forward. It makes us feel like we're making progress, but it's the most surface level change. And what happens is that will usually only be temporary, right?
Okay.
Because all of those other levels haven't been achieved. And so when we work our way up, we've got the second level, which is your behaviors. And this is where usually people will stop. So now we're talking about I'm going to change what I eat. I'm going to have a list of foods. I'm going to follow food rules. I'm going to drink more water. I'm going to change my sleep schedule. I'm going to exercise, right? And the thing about behaviors, changing your behaviors, is it's not inherently a bad thing, but you're missing a lot of ingredients. And the reason why people focus on behaviors is that that's the last level that you can see to your visible eye. So when you're looking at other people, right, you're looking at people who have what you want, you
Right.
will ask yourself, what are they doing? What can I see? What can I imitate? But when you look at the most successful people in the world and you ask them, how did you achieve that? Like, how did you achieve a certain goal? They won't normally tell you what they did. They'll tell you what they changed internally. And
Mhm.
the thing about that is that you can't see it. And so when you're looking at someone who has what you want, you cannot see the changes, which is think of an iceberg. You'll see the top 5%. You don't see the 95% that's hiding underneath the surface. So
Mhm.
you're stuck at the behavior. And the thing is, you're also approaching the behavior change the wrong way.
Okay.
So you mentioned I'm drinking a lot of water. You mentioned the word rules. So when
Mhm.
I hear the word rules, that sets off an alarm in my mind because if you're having rules, that tells me that there's most likely an all or nothing mentality in your mind, right? You're going all in
Mhm.
or you're off the wagon. It's very much in and out, on and off, this like roller coaster. Now, I might be wrong, but is there some truth to that for you?
I would think so. I have worked on that in the past, and there's just one meal or one situation, and then do the next right thing, right?
Hmm.
And so I can do that pretty well, but not all the time.
Hmm. Yeah.
Mhm,
And then another thing is when you're adding a medical condition on top of it, like PCOS, you're
mhm.
going to get very extreme advice. Cut
Yes,
out wheat, cut out
yes.
sugar. And so that gets ingrained in your psyche, and you start seeing this. You put those foods in a category, do not eat, right? And then it can create some negative emotions, some stress, some anxiety around those foods. And then when you do have those foods, you're like, shoot, I made a mistake. And then that can spiral into destructive behaviors as well. Do you feel
Yeah,
like you've experienced that?
yes.
Yeah.
And I'm tired of not just that intuitive eating, just enjoy good food.
Hmm.
There's I realize you can go down a road of a lot of junk and all
Hmm.
that, but my focus is good food, even with a teenager in the house. But um,
Yeah.
we work around those things. But yes, I agree. And every time I read something, I'm like, oh, one more thing that I'm doing wrong, one more
Hmm.
thing that isn't good for me now, one more, and it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. You feel like you can't eat anything,
And
right?
after a while, you just kind of give up. You're like, well,
Yeah,
yes, that is
exactly.
correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So, first of all, I want you to know that I have worked with clients who had PCOS, who had diabetes, who had been used to getting all of this extreme advice. And what's really interesting is that not only do you not have to go into those extremes in order to manage those conditions, but
Mhm.
actually when you go into those extremes with this stressful relationship with food, you're more likely to do the opposite. You're more likely to overeat and to crave those foods more. So
Yeah.
now we're only at the behavior, which is the second tier. So this is where people stop, and this is why people get stuck. So they do a behavior, they'll do it for a few weeks, and then they fall off the wagon and they fall right back to where they were before. And that's because they haven't moved up the ladder. So then when we go one step above, we're at the skills or capabilities. So
Okay.
these are the skills that allow you to create new behaviors. Most people don't think, especially if you've had an extreme view on health, on weight loss, you've dieted a lot of your life, you are used to the behaviors that are going to lead to short term weight loss, but you haven't learned the skills that you need to actually maintain a healthy, sustainable, and balanced lifestyle. So,
Mhm.
when we're talking about skills, when I'm working with clients, the skills that you need, especially in the context of emotional eating, one of the biggest skills that never gets taught is emotional regulation.
Mm.
It is the ability to sense, to navigate all emotions in a way that will be conductive to a healthy mental, physical, and emotional health. So, what I mean by that is most people have never been taught how to deal with their emotions.
Mhm.
And so, what we do, and we've been taught that feeling a negative emotion is a wrong, bad thing. So, I'm going to numb, distract myself by eating, by drinking, by smoking. And when someone's struggling with emotional eating, what they'll usually do is they'll set rules, parameters, constraints around what foods they can eat or not. But this is a band aid solution because what's really going on is that your nervous system, whenever it feels a strong emotion like stress, overwhelm, loneliness, sadness, boredom, it sees that as a threat. because your nervous system is really there for your survival. Think of like millions of years ago when you're out in the jungle and you're being chased by a tiger or a lion,
Mhm.
your nervous system sees that as a threat to your survival. And over time, anything that will create this sense of pressure, this sense of stress, anxiety, our nervous system records it as something is wrong. Therefore, we need to get ourselves back to a state of equilibrium, to a state of peace and of balance. And most emotional eaters have learned to do that through food, right? That's what it means to cope with food. However, the thing about these coping mechanisms is that they're temporary. So you experience short-term relief, but in the long term, the emotions come back. You come back to this sense of agitation, of nervous system unregulation, and then you have an added layer of guilt, of shame from overeating. So we're at this third level of the logical levels of change. And these are the skills. And we talked about one, which is emotional regulation when it comes to emotional eating. But another skill is the ability to listen and respond to your body cues. And this is a skill that can be learned. Of course, we're all born with it, but a lot of us lose that ability through dieting and restriction and listening to other people. So the skill of reconnecting to your body, that's a capability to be learned. When you look at people who just are normal around food, they just eat, they can leave food on their plate, they don't binge. What we don't see is their skill of listening to their bodies, right? So we're just looking at them and we're thinking, what are they doing? Well, they're exercising a lot, they're drinking a lot of water, and we try to imitate that. So does that make sense so far? Are you following?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. So now we're at that third tier. There's still some way to go. So even if you have the skills, we have to work our way up another step. And this is where we talk about your beliefs. This is where we start talking about your brain, about your mind, your subconscious mind. What are the things that you tell yourself? What is your self-talk? What is going on inside of your mind on a daily basis? Because your thoughts trigger an emotion. So you have a negative thought, it will trigger a negative emotion. Your emotion will drive you to a behavior. So do you think that when you have a negative thought and a negative emotion, do you think you're more likely to take a positive action or a negative action?
Negative.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's take an example of what is one, and this could be a little bit tough if you're doing thought work for the first time. And when I'm working with my clients at the beginning, they don't really know what's going on in their mind because we're living on autopilot, right? Like
Yeah.
we're not really present to what's going on, and we think that our thoughts are us. And what I really focus on is teaching you the skills to create distance between you and your thoughts so that you can look at it from a neutral point of view and decide, do I want to continue to have this thought or not? And what was really precious, I just got off of a coaching call with my members, and it's been 2 weeks, and one of my clients was saying this week was a massive win because in the past, it always felt like there was this devil on my shoulder, this negative voice that was always telling me I wasn't doing enough, that I was a failure, that I should just give up, like all of these negative thoughts. And this week there was an angel on the other shoulder that was actually now fighting back, and that was bringing me to an awareness of, what have I accomplished this week? What are the small steps that I can take? And I was feeling this kind of push and pull between the two voices. And that's my struggle now. And what I was saying is, that's not a struggle. That's growth, because you didn't have that angel before.
Right.
So if we were to come back to your situation, have you ever done any work to rewire the thoughts that are driving your behaviors?
Yes, I have, but sometimes it was more around a relationship versus just me as the individual, but myself in a relationship, or like when you were talking about negative thoughts and all of those things that you were saying, this is so true. It's like, why is it okay for me to say that to myself, but I would never in a million years say that to my son,
Hmm.
right? Like, I would never give those messages to him. But why is it okay? Well, it's because a lot of times our internal message stems from an external message we did receive.
Yeah.
But I think that I've worked a lot on self-awareness just because of things that have happened in my life, things I've had to work on for myself. But for some reason, I feel like I'm doing a lot of the right things. And this is the one last thing. And you can't hide it when you're walking around with extra weight. People know something's up. Is it
Hmm.
because they're not eating properly, meaning a lot of junk, or is it because of more of the emotional that you're referring to and all of that, and the quantities and timing and all of that? So I would say that I have, but there's always room for improvement because clearly there's more work to be done.
Yeah. And I guess I'll reframe my question to be more specific to when you've been trying to heal your relationship with food specifically.
Yeah.
So heal the way that you think, feel, and behave around food.
Mhm.
Have you ever worked your way up to what are the beliefs? What are and most of the time we
Mhm.
don't know what the beliefs are that are driving our behaviors because we live in a culture that has taught us so many flawed beliefs around food that we
Right.
don't know which ones to believe, which ones are helping
Mhm.
us, which ones are harming us. So, have you ever done any work at that level when it comes to food?
I would say that I've done some, but it's been more just reading about it, educating myself versus making myself actually make the changes. I spent a few weeks with a counselor and we were doing tapping, for instance, and
Okay.
talking about your emotions and then tapping that. And it was great when I was doing it, but I didn't keep it up.
Hmm.
So, and which is frustrating, embarrassing, all those things that pour in, because you're like, well, if you learned this, why aren't you applying it? But I tend to always say, I don't want to make excuses. I want to just understand the real reason
Yeah.
behind what's
Yeah.
happening. Um,
And what you said is, I've done a bit, I've done some reading, but it's
yeah,
the application.
right.
I want to help you see a new perspective because if that's I think that's a big trap that people get caught up in is, I'll read the books, I'll follow the social media
Right.
accounts, I'll listen to the podcast, but I know the stuff, I just can't apply it. And it's as if, you go out on this journey to become a swimmer and you read a book about swimming and you follow Michael Phelps on social media
Right.
and you listen to some podcasts, but you never get in the water and you never
Right.
practice. And I use that analogy because I was a swimmer for 8 years and a lot of practice goes into it for it to become muscle memory and then
Sure.
for it to become easy and improve on it. So I don't want you to feel like you're hopeless or you're at your wits end because you're really just scratching the surface
Yeah.
and you're there. What a beautiful opportunity to see, okay, I'm really curious and I want to make a change and I want to address what's important. Right?
Mhm.
I'm done just doing the quick fix, the diets, the extremes. Like I'm done with that. And just making that decision is a massive first step. So I want to make sure that we finish because we're not done with the logical levels. We still got some
No.
way to go. So,
Yeah.
so far, and I hope that everyone who's listening is like drawing that pyramid. So we've got environment at the very bottom, then we've got changing our behaviors, developing the skills, challenging and changing our deep-rooted beliefs. And just so everyone knows, like our deep-rooted beliefs, some of them are so deep because we've developed them before we were 7 years old. And we don't realize how much they are controlling our lives. And this is everyone. And we all have blind spots. I have so many tools on how to rewire beliefs because I do this work. I teach it to my clients. And I am constantly doing this work on myself and constantly being mind blown about things that I'm learning that I didn't even know were going on subconsciously. And I have my mentors and I have coaches and guides who help me because I can't see it for myself. I need this outside perspective. So we've got our beliefs, and then when we work our way up another ladder, this is one of my favorite. It's one of the most impactful, and it's when you change your identity. Your identity, who you believe that you are, is going to dictate the beliefs that you have about yourself, about the world, around food, exercise, about your body. It's going to dictate the skills that you develop, your behaviors, and your environment. So, for example, if you're someone who has struggled with food your entire life, without even knowing it, you've probably taken on the identity of, I am someone who's always going to struggle with food. And then you perpetuate that in your life, right? You'll try one diet and it doesn't work. You can't stick to it. And then that belief gets reconfirmed. All right, see, you're someone who's always going to struggle with food. And then it becomes it's a self-perpetuating prophecy, right? Because now this is who you believe to be. And so you're always going to fall to the level of your identity. So if you have an identity that's not serving you, you're going to fall to that level. If you have an identity of something that is serving you, you're going to rise to that level. So an example is, for the longest time, it wasn't intentional, but I didn't see myself as a reader. I was a reader growing up. I read all the Harry Potter books about 7 times. And then I got in the world of sport and I stopped reading. And then when I started my business, I didn't really see myself as a reader. And what do you think happened? I didn't read any books. And then eventually I decided I'm going to read a book. And the very first book that I read was Atomic Habits. And it talks about the concept of identity. And it talks about the concept. Yeah. And it says, if you want to become a reader, you have to identify as a reader. So I said, you know what? I'm going to start this. And in order to make that happen, I'm just going to read 1 page a day. I'm going to start that small. I'm going to read 1 page a day. And what happened is that over time, it was such a small step that it was easy for me to stick to. So I read 1 page a day. Sometimes I read more, but no matter what, I was consistent with it. And as my behaviors confirmed my identity that I was a reader, then my identity perpetuated the behaviors of a reader. So now I have been reading every single day ever since. And on those days where I'm like not really in the mood, there's just this voice that's like, no, I'm a reader. So just read 1 page, right? It's so easy. Yeah. Same for someone who never identified as an athlete, someone who never identified as enjoying exercise. They're not likely to try things that are out of their comfort zone, to try different things, because they don't identify as someone who would. Whereas for me, I've always been an athlete. I've always enjoyed exercise. So if someone asked me to go do a boxing class, even though I've never done boxing, well, I'm going to try it out because who knows, I might like it or not. So your identity is going to drive everything that you do. And for you and for anyone who's listening, start paying attention to the words that you say after I am or I always. I was actually having this conversation with my clients today. One of them said, I'm a chocoholic. And I said, but are you? Or do you just enjoy chocolate? Because when you tell yourself, I'm a chocoholic, what you're telling your brain is, I'm addicted to chocolate. So if you see yourself as addicted to chocolate, your brain is so powerful and it always wants to be right. And so what's going to happen is next time that you're around chocolate, what's going to happen? You're going to lose control because your brain wants to be right. If you're a chocoholic, it's going to create that in the 3D reality. Think of it, this is like a very good analogy. What happens in your mind is like a projector. And what happens in the world, what you see, what is the physical manifestation of that, is what gets projected onto the wall. So if you don't change what's going on in your mind, if you don't change what you're inputting in the projector, you're not going to see something different in your physical reality, or you might just very temporarily. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Do you have any
All,
questions about that?
no, I was going to say it all makes sense to me, and it all makes sense also with different things that I've done to try to change the
Yeah.
beliefs and all. But I will say that I've fallen into that probably over the past couple of years now. I'm the person that can't go do that hike or can't
Hmm.
go somewhere because there's too much walking.
Yeah.
And I want to be the person who used to do those things, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like I'm working back towards that. But unfortunately for me, all this problem with mobility has brought on quite a bit of weight.
Hmm.
And so it is difficult for me to kind of move around and do stuff compared to before. So I want to be that person. I want to get back to that person that I was. But
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
spent so long, I started to believe that I'm now this person that isn't going to be capable.
Yeah.
And I don't like that. I don't want to do
Yeah.
that.
One remedy as you are working on changing your identity is, and this can be really helpful for anyone who has a hard time, like let's say that you want to believe that I am someone who can go on that hike. I am someone
Mhm.
who can whatever you want to set your mind to, but you have a hard time believing it either because it's not yet possible for you or because you're making such a jump from the old person that you believe that you were for 40 years and now you're like your brain is like that's not true. And now you're fighting because you feel like you're lying to yourself. What can be a really good remedy is to change the words to I am in the process of becoming.
Mm,
So that way, you're no longer identifying with the old version of you and you're
mm,
working, your eyes are on the vision of who you're becoming. I am in the process of becoming the person who, right? So that can be a good transitional language, transitional thought that you have. And I love talking about identity, and I could really talk about this for hours because it's so incredibly powerful because the second that you change how you see yourself and who you identify as, you're going to notice that the people you hang around, the boundaries that you hold, the way you want to get treated are going to
mm,
change. For example, I have an identity. I have amazing friends. I am very grateful about the people I get to have in my life.
right.
And in recent times, someone came into my life who over time I started to see her true colors. And I asked myself, am I the type of person who chooses this person as a friend? Who
Mm,
would want to have this person as a friend? If I look at all the people I get to have in my life, is this someone I would choose to have in my life? And the
yeah.
answer was no. And so and sometimes creating a new reality for yourself and becoming someone new is going to require making some hard choices.
Mhm.
It's going to require getting uncomfortable, especially when we talk about those logical levels of change. When you work on becoming someone different, on having different beliefs, different skills, different behaviors, if you expect it to feel comfortable, think again
No.
because what's comfortable is what's known, right? Think of your
Mhm.
comfort zone. It's what you know, what you can predict, what's familiar to you. That's why we repeat dieting over and over and over again. It's not because it works, it's not because it makes us happy,
Mhm.
it's because it's predictable. We
Hmm.
know what's going to happen. We're going to do it for a few weeks. We're going to fall off the wagon. We know what's going to happen. And so when we go into the realm of intuitive eating or healing your relationship with food and your body, you've never done that. So it
Yeah.
feels scary. And when things feel scary, it doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's not meant for you. Actually,
Mhm.
most of the time, if you're afraid to do something, if you feel discomfort, if you feel like you're like jumping into a void, good. That's like your green light. You're
Right.
growing. You're doing something different. You're getting out of your comfort zone. And growth only happens outside of your comfort zone. So I feel uncomfortable every single day because I'm constantly working on growing. I actually have a post-it on my computer that says safety or success.
Mm.
Safety is inside of your comfort zone. Success is where that discomfort is. So when it comes to the level of identity, and there's one more, but when it
Okay.
comes to the level of identity, do you have any questions or any thoughts on that?
I don't. No, I think that well, at least the changing the identity, I feel like in my 20s I started doing that when it came to my family of origin and who I was in the family and made some healthy changes there, made some healthy changes in a marriage, et cetera. So I know what it takes to do that. And so that discomfort,
Yeah.
I know it well. I also know as I say now, you know, the decisions that I made, I sleep well at night, meaning
Yeah.
they were the right decisions, but it was not easy
Not easy.
and at all. So I know that in my lifetime, I've done those things, and but I think changing your identity, having to go through the belief step first
Hmm.
is tough because I think those internal messages just tell you, who are you kidding? That's not who you are. Versus absolutely you should go for it. So I get that and I want that. I guess is the best way to put that. I want to be able to do that. I admire that with other people. But I
Hmm.
also at my age, I also have learned a little bit more quickly the toxicity of certain people and how to pull away from that.
Hmm. You
I'm
brought up something really beautiful on the concept of, those beliefs that are going to say, who are you to do that?
Mhm.
And that's where the power of having a community of people who
Yeah.
think in the way that you are striving to think, that is so powerful because when you're left to your own devices and you don't have the tools to take control of those thoughts and to change them, then what's going to happen is they're going to win, right? Because they're automatic. They are easy to think. They will keep coming up until you make the decision that I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not thinking that
Mm.
anymore. And it takes more mental work, absolutely. But the thing is, and I hear this a lot of like, what I do is I help people address the root cause, right?
Mhm.
And it sounds hard. It sounds like it would take time and take effort. But the thing is that if you can dedicate a few months to doing this, well, you've been doing the same thing for decades and it
Right.
hasn't worked. So quick fixes, they sound great because it's usually low effort,
Mhm.
high reward in the short term,
Right.
but over time it creates bigger problems.
Mm.
So it is so valuable to do the work that might be a little bit more in depth at the beginning
Mhm.
so that you can reap the rewards over and over and over again for the rest of your life. So I want to make sure that we get to the last level. And so now we've talked about the identity, and the very last piece of it is your vision
Mhm.
or your purpose. So this is where it's not even about you anymore, but it's about your place in the world. So For example, the reason why I sometimes get people who will ask me questions because I used to have eating disorders. And so I've had questions asked of like, are you ever afraid that you're going to slip back? And the answer is without a shadow of a doubt, there's no way. And the reason why I think it's because I've done a lot of work and it's all of everything that I know is really ingrained in me, but it's not even about me anymore. I am now part of a movement who is making sure that thousands and millions of women also find freedom because it's a movement. It's not just about me, it's about the collective. So and sometimes when I talk about purpose and vision, people are like, oh my God, I don't even know what my purpose and vision is. You don't need to know yet, right? If you can work on changing your identity, then you're far ahead of most people. But you'll see that when you achieve that confidence and certainty in who you are and your identity, then you can start thinking about, what do I have to give to the world? How can I help someone else? How can I have an impact on someone else? And it's when you get to that point that, oh, you're a completely different person. And the changes that you've created, they're not reversible, right? Like this is where you are. This is who you are. So now that you know why it feels like the things that you've been doing, you've been feeling so stuck and frustrated, does it make sense knowing how the change really happens and the things that are happening underneath the surface that you haven't yet tapped into?
It does, but it also reinforces needing to be a part of a community and a support system, and also continuing to understand that I can be your best cheerleader, but I need to be my best cheerleader. And that's the part I fall a little flat on. I can be there and support you all day long, but I need to do better at doing that for myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of these steps in the pyramid do make sense. Absolutely.
All right. So we ended with a little chit chat and then I sent her on her way with a few action steps and things to focus on. But I hope that you got so much value from that you took so many notes. And also ask yourself, going into this week, where are some areas, where are some of those levels of change that I haven't tapped into? What are some of the skills that I haven't developed? What are some of the beliefs that are holding me back, that are keeping me in the old version of me, the version of me who's stuck, who's negative, who's self-sabotaging? And what is my identity, right? Who do I identify as? How is that identity holding me back and keeping me stuck? So those are really some questions that you're going to want to ask and reflect on, because when you can get clear on where you are, then you can start working towards where you want to go. So I love you so much. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.